Hello and welcome, my fine feathered friends. This is Songbird, and I am so glad you're here today. This will be the first in a series of speed build with commentary videos on building Mr. Meola's Mountaintop mansion. Our first video will be all about how I created the round foundations for these buildings, and also my process for planning out the rest of the build so that it would nestle perfectly into the terrain. So come along with me as I share the trials and tribulations, the mistakes, and the discoveries that I made along the way. And make sure to stick around until later in the video when I show you how Captain Fat Dog, Ark Builder Extraordinaire, helped me solve a problem that had me absolutely stumped. I hope you enjoy, and let's get going. Primal Fear is an extremely dangerous mod, and there's creatures all over the place that have explosion attacks, and so my instinct with Primal Fear is always to build up high. And so I found the highest spot on the map, which was this mountaintop. Being up high also means that you only have to contend with flying enemies, and at least it reduces your chances of being blown to smithereens by some sort of ground-based foe with an explosive attack. Ever since I learned how to build circles in Ark, I've been addicted to building in circles, and it just seemed like that would also be the shape of building that would best fit this terrain on the very tippy top of the mountain here. So this is a way of doing circles that I really like, starting with triangles and then snapping these square ceilings over them like that. Just gives you more spots for snapping fence foundations, and you want to make sure to snap them right in the middle and not to one side or the other there, which gets a little fiddly at times, so you just gotta keep trying until you get it right. And also, these are vanilla fence foundations. I have not found any modded fence foundations that work quite the same, so I always use vanilla for this step in making a circle build. Sometimes I use tech, like here. Sometimes I use metal or stone, just as long as you can see it clearly, so you can make sure that it's snapped correctly to the right snap point and is at the right height. And I noticed here that there were some that were a little lower. Every fourth fence foundation was snapping at a slightly lower point, and I couldn't quite figure out why. I'm still kind of a noob when it comes to the more advanced building techniques myself, so I was trying to fiddle with it and see if I could figure out what the heck was going on and why it was doing that. So I had to re-snap them a few times to get them to cooperate. The fact that they were so evenly spaced really puzzled me. It showed that there was something specific going on. It wasn't just Ark being glitchy or just a one-off thing. And I also could see that they were not lined up totally correctly, because the pillars, some of them were slightly in farther or out farther than others. And I try to be really picky with the foundation layer and trying to get it all snapped correctly, because of course if you mess up on this layer, all the snaps for the whole rest of the building, it's gonna bug you. So it's worth taking the time to get it right. But there's also a point at which you kind of have to go, you know what, I don't have time to mess with this anymore. I think I can cover this with decorative details or make it work later on, so I'm gonna try that. And since I couldn't figure out why they were snapping that way, I decided to just keep going and try to fix it later. Because the thing that takes the longest is always figuring out the plan of what you're going to do. Once you know what you're going to do, it's a lot easier to just go back, pick everything up, and start over again if you need to. So I decided to continue with the planning process, and then just know that I might come back and tear all of this down and start over again at a later time. And I was trying to use some of the different pillar sizes in S+ as well. And in this stage, I usually try to have the pillars intersect with the ground, because then you will have foundation support for the structure from the pillars instead of just with the fence foundations, and you can even remove the fence foundations later if you want to. And if you have access to admin commands, going into ghost mode sometimes, so you can go into the mesh and snap things from underneath at a different angle will sometimes make that a lot easier. The ceilings that I used for this particular circle were the S+ glass ceilings, because I thought I might need to leave them there, but then make them invisible so that they wouldn't be seen as part of the build. So here I'm using the multi-tool on the model setting and choosing the option no sides, and it makes the glass completely invisible, but those ceilings are still there. So sometimes if you're building a circle on flat terrain, you can then snap a square foundation to the pillar. It'll be a little bit away from it, but snapped in perfect alignment with the pillar. But since the terrain here was far from flat, that didn't work. So I decided to use pillars instead, which is another method I use sometimes. And you will notice here that the pillars are floating. And so let's pause and I'll explain here that I remembered at this point that Mr. Meola has a setting on his server here. It's an S+ INI option that removes the requirement for foundation support. So that just makes it a lot easier for certain parts of the building. There's not as much scaffolding needed. Yeah, if I was doing this without that setting on, then I would just make the pillars longer. Of course, they would need to intersect with the ground. I've actually never built with that setting enabled before. This was my first time ever using it, but I was curious to see how it would change the experience. It is definitely nice not having to worry about picking up one wall or pillar and demolishing the entire building. But as I discovered later on, S+ having that option enabled does not affect the Castles, Keeps, and Fortresses build pieces. Those are separate and those are still subject to regular Ark physics, so I had to be careful there. And I love the fact that in S+ you can change the appearance of a lot of the building pieces to look like a lower tier item. And so I decided to use text ceilings here so that it would be easy for me to try out a variety of different textures to see how they would look. It'd be easy to toggle them to different appearances and I wouldn't have to go through and replace them to try out different looks. So my first instinct was to try stone because I was curious if the fact that some of the ceilings were slightly lower would show up as much with stone, and sure enough, they really blended in pretty seamlessly. And I don't know if anybody noticed, but in this build and in most of my builds, anything circular I make using vanilla texture. It may be S+, not actual vanilla pieces, but I use vanilla stone or wood or another vanilla texture because of the fact that modded foundations and ceilings, the textures on them tend to flicker if you have a whole bunch of them meshed together, like happens when you're building a circle here. And that visually just bugs the heck out of me. I can't stand the flickering textures. So I save the modded textures like the CKFR tile floors, which are gorgeous. I save those for square or rectangular parts of the build or areas where the floors won't have to overlap with each other. And then use vanilla texture for the round portions because I don't know why, but the vanilla textures are just far more stable. So I moved my teleporter onto here for the build site, just in case I went out to do any scouting or something, make it quick and easy for me to get back here. At this point in the circle, you'll notice that if I just go out with straight square ceilings, they don't cover all of the ground, all of the area. There's a gap in between them. And there's a variety of different ways to fill that gap. There's different things that you can do. There are tutorials out there for making actual like 48 or 64 sided circles in Ark, but those seem a little complicated, and I've kind of come up with my own little workarounds for doing this. I decided to just keep going because I needed to eyeball how big this was going to be and how far out I was going to go. And you'll also notice that I didn't need any foundation support, whereas normally, of course, if you went 2 ceilings out from a pillar or a foundation, you would then need more foundation support again. In a normal build, I'd just be snapping foundations underneath there or extra pillars, but with that special S+ INI setting enabled, I didn't have to worry about it, which is nice and saves a lot of structures, which in a big build, you definitely want to save structures where possible to help prevent at least a little bit of the lag. So I decided to start experimenting with some of the different ways I've found of filling in those gaps. So first I decided to try a pinwheel type design, which is what I call it when the ceilings are snapped to just one side of the central spokes, all facing the same direction. So I snapped them all to the right of the spokes and then snapped some walls on to see what the wall texture would look like if I chose that option. Decided to try going out a little further and see what that looked like. At this stage of things, I like to just play, basically, just try a bunch of different things, even if I know I'm not going to use it, just so I can have different options. So I noticed that if I went out one more, then I could do 3 ceilings out from each spoke, and the square ceilings were easier to mesh together on the sides than the triangles I tried earlier, which were not cooperating. And then get out some walls and see what that wall texture would look like. I did use a similar method while I was building Hogwarts for some of the circular towers there. But I just wanted to get a look at what this would look like on this specific build. And yeah, it was getting a little too dark, so made it day. Yay for admin commands. So since there are 3 ceilings across, snapped to the end of each of these spokes, I was able to snap 2 overlapping gate frames from Castles, Keeps, and Fortresses to each one, and that made a really interesting design, like tall Gothic looking window. I love how the CKF gates also have large glass windows that you can put in them if you're not using them as a gate. Can make a really interesting looking window. So I decided I did like this texture better than the previous one with the pinwheel effect, but I decided to play around a little bit with the different variants on these windows and see what those would look like. And pick up all of the pinwheel pieces and do the 3 across pattern here instead. I decided to try some of the other CKFR wall options and see what those would look like overlapped. So there's these CKF modular arches, which can be a lot of fun in certain situations. So obviously if I was actually using them, I would have them up a lot higher, but I just wanted to see how the arch part itself would look overlapped. So it's got 2 side pieces and then a central piece. I didn't end up using this option on this particular building, but definitely filed this one away in my brain for a future build because I did like the way it looked with those pieces overlapping. A lot of people have commented on the level of detail in my builds, and honestly what creates the detail is usually just playing around with different options, just seeing what different pieces can do, including if they snap wrong. If something snaps wrong, meshing through each other, whatever, it looks bad if it's just one. But if you snap something wrong 12 times or 50 times or whatever and do it in a symmetrical looking way, then it can actually look pretty cool. So yeah, just play around and don't be afraid of making mistakes. It's a game. It's for fun, right? There are no mistakes.
Don't worry about it. We don't make mistakes. We have happy accidents.
You'll probably see a lot of things like that in this build. Things that look like they're a mistake, but if they're done enough times in a symmetrical way, they can actually look pretty cool. So I liked the overall look of this. I liked the little triangles in a different material pointing towards the center like that. but I wasn't sure about the outer ring, what I wanted that to be made out of, so trying a few different things here. I do really love making patterns, and I'm always on the lookout for an interesting looking pattern. Having an eye for patterns can also help you with spotting errors. If you can see a flaw in the pattern, then it'll help you know which snap point is off. Love this feature of S Plus, being able to change appearances on things, especially being able to do it remotely with the multi-tool. So you don't have to sit there with the radial. So I wanted to fill in underneath this by hanging walls from those ceilings down to the ground. But unfortunately, it seems the tall walls will not snap downwards. The regular walls will, but the tall ones will only snap upwards from the ceiling. Do not know why, but I was never able to get it to give me a snap point, so just gave up on that and moved on. I knew I'd want to have a tech elevator going from the bottom section to the top there, and in order to line up a tech elevator perfectly, you want to have a wall connecting them, at least at first. You can get rid of the wall later, but they have to be lined up perfectly with each other. And this is the only way I've been able to figure out how to do it. It would have been nice to be able to use the tall walls, would have saved a lot of time, but they were not cooperating, so had to do the short walls. So this was actually the first thing that I built on that lower part, was the bottom of where the tech elevator to the top was going to be. And then I built the rest of the building around that, pretty much. So what I like to do when I'm planning out a build like this is to just kind of sketch with foundations the overall shape, and then just back up and take a look at it and just see how it fits in with the terrain, see if I like the overall look. So if I'm not in creative mode, I'll keep an Argy or a Pteranodon nearby, or have a Sonoma crops on my back so that I can do that. I've even sometimes used a Rex or a Giga as a scaffold, just standing on its head, or even a Bronto standing on its head, just to get a little bit of distance to look down at the build, and also to be able to reach things like the roof if I'm making it really tall. So again, this is just sketching out shapes. So the material used and also the height of them isn't really important at this point. It's just the overall general shape. So this part is definitely more art than science. There's a lot of eyeballing that goes on. Picking which contours of the ground I want to follow, which features of the terrain I want to clip through, and which ones I want to go around and highlight. You kind of just gotta play with it until you like how it looks. But I like to have my builds look like they belong on the terrain where they were built, almost like they grew there organically, like a mushroom or something. Part of the reason I haven't made step-by-step build tutorials before is that I really like to have each build be so unique and so uniquely fit the terrain that it really couldn't be built anywhere else. I don't know, I might do tutorials someday, but if I do, they'll probably be tutorials for much smaller builds, or like I'm doing with this one, kind of mini tutorials about different parts or aspects of a build, rather than step-by-step how to build the entire thing. A lot of people have also asked about my inspirations for this build, and the idea that I had in my head is that since the map is called Olympus, it seems to have a little bit of a kind of a Greco or Romanesque feel to it. And so I kind of was thinking that I wanted to make something like an abandoned temple of the gods, or at least something with definite classical sort of influences. So the next episode in this series will be about columns and the ways that I figured out to make some columns in Ark that I really enjoyed. I really liked how those turned out. But it wasn't cooperating with me. I couldn't get quite the angle that I wanted using the triangles and squares, because it just didn't feel to me like it fit the terrain properly. So when I got some distance from this and took a look at it, it just didn't seem quite right. I thought maybe I could correct the angle a little bit using some triangles or something, or maybe adding a tower to one side to help balance it out visually. Just threw some big walls on it as well, just to help with seeing how it would fit the terrain from this angle as well. And yeah, it just was not right. It was just not the right angle. It did not look the way I wanted it to, so went back and picked it all up again. So here I popped inside the mesh again to pick up the pieces that I put through the mesh here to connect them. And I decided to make one last try at connecting the other structures to the structure I wanted to put here. Yeah, it still just was not right, but I thought maybe adding one more triangle might possibly fix it. So I picked up all of the pieces except for just a few in case I wanted to use that angle, and I switched over to this one little promontory to working on the circular build that I wanted to have over here. Originally I was thinking of putting the greenhouse here, which I wanted to be round, but eventually this ended up becoming the disco room, and I put the greenhouse elsewhere because it would have been way too big for a greenhouse. Did a quick flyby to look at all of the different terrain, and of course got distracted by things that still needed doing up here. But you know, I found it really helps my creative process to just let myself be distracted, let myself kind of follow the ADHD and be impulsive, do whatever is calling to me about a project. And I mean, I may do a little bit here and then jump over and do a little bit on a different part of the project and jump around, but eventually it all gets done. So it works for me, even though I know it's anathema to how most people work. But I don't know, I just kind of have given up on forcing myself to concentrate on one thing at a time when it just doesn't feel natural to me. And honestly, moving to a different part of the project and doing something else can kind of feel like a break to my brain, you know, it can feel a little bit refreshing. So when I go back to the original thing I was working on before, I'll go back with, you know, with new ideas, with a refreshed mind. And I think that also kind of contributes to the overall project looking a little bit more cohesive, because it wasn't being built on completely separate days, completely separate times. It was kind of all being built at the same time. Of course, if this was a base that I built in survival, which I probably would not build something this big in survival, to be honest, but the bases that I build in survival tend to evolve over time. So I might start with one section, one thing in mind, but then as the game progresses, as you tame different creatures, as you reach different stages of the game, the base just kind of has to evolve. So I had decided to pick up all of the pieces inside those little triangle gaps because I wanted to try using the CKFR ceilings in there, and the CKFR ceilings are lower than the S+ ones and will tend to snap underneath rather than replacing them, which can make it hard to see where they're going. So I decided I really liked the look of the CKFR tile ceilings in these little triangle gaps here. Just gives an interesting bit of detail to the floor, breaks it up so it's not so boring, all the same texture. But I kind of wanted to fill in a bit of a gap there, and I mean, I'm sure nobody else would have noticed it, but it bugged me a little bit, so I decided to use some of the CKFR accent pieces to just fill that in a little bit. I tried to also edge the rest of the triangle with them, but they were not cooperating. They wouldn't snap to the other side of the triangle there, and You know, you gotta pick your battles. I didn't want to fight with every single one of these all the way around the circle. So I decided to give up on that little bit and move on. Especially because I kind of knew what was causing it is most modded pieces will prefer to snap to pieces from their own mod. So I decided to take a break from this part of the build again and head back to the other circle that I was working on down below. And I very quickly saw that I was having the same issue as I had before, where some of the fence foundations were lower than the others, and it was happening again with every fourth fence foundation. It was really frustrating to try to figure out what the heck was causing that. Kind of made a cool star pattern, but was not what I was looking for, still with the lowered one in there. So I decided to take out the triangle foundations in case that's what it was snapping to again. And I decided to swap out all the ceilings for vanilla ones as well, because it was still a little low. That's usually one of my first troubleshooting techniques if I'm using modded pieces, is to switch to vanilla and see if the problem continues, because that'll at least tell me if it's a problem with the base game or if it's something to do with the mod itself, some kind of mod quirk. All right, so those are all picked up. Of course, if foundation support wasn't disabled on this server, I'd probably have to just go ahead and snap a foundation underneath each of those square ceilings so that the foundation support would be there, but they would all be supported equally, like the same way, rather than there just being the triangles underneath that some of them were snapped to, but not all of them. That seemed to fix the height issue, but it seemed like the pillars were still snapping kind of wonky. Once again, the circle just wasn't right. So I picked up all of the S+ pillars that I tried to start with and decided to try vanilla to see if the problem persisted. And some of the fence foundations broke because without foundation support underneath, they had attached themselves to the pillars. Because the whole no foundation support required thing can be a little glitchy at times. So they still kind of think they need foundation support. So when I removed the pillars, they broke. But no biggie, easy enough to replace. But yep, even with vanilla, it was being lumpy and weird, and I did not know what was going on, what was causing that particular issue, which was different than the one, obviously, with the triangle foundations underneath and some of them being lower than the others. So you can see I'm still learning this stuff as well. I just am trying to learn it and perfect it, polish things up as I go, get a little bit better each time.
You're just making this up as you go along.
Yep. But I do it brilliantly.
Because in this, like in many other things, perfectionism can really be the enemy of creativity. It can really kill your creativity if you're too critical of what you're doing. You have to let yourself make mistakes and be okay with things not being perfect. So once again, went back to work on another part of the build while I tried to think through what I could do about this. So just more filling in of foundations to get a general idea of the shape of the terrain and the shape of the building I wanted to put there. Especially since I was inspired by classical architecture styles, Greco-Roman styles. I wanted it to be very symmetrical in the front. And this sort of seemed like the front to me, even if it wouldn't be the front door that you would reach if you went up the land route to the top of the mountain. Nobody would be going up the land route very often. It would be approached via teleporter or by flyers, and so this just seemed like it was going to be a better spot to be the front. So I wanted it to be symmetrical in the front. I had an idea in my head of some big pillars, a nice big opening or gateway, but didn't have any of the details figured out yet, because the fine details I tend to figure out as I go along. I did like it being a little lower in the front there, so I finally decided to take my problem to Captain Fat Dog's Discord and ask on there, and thankfully Cap was able to reply pretty quickly, and he knew exactly what was going on, that the fence foundations were actually rotated the wrong way, and it was because I was placing them a little bit willy-nilly, like sometimes in front of myself, at more or less at my feet, sometimes across the circle opposite from me. And apparently the fence foundations are actually a little bit different in the snap points on each side. So I picked everything up again and decided to start over, and this time be really careful about that. So get my ceiling star going here, my 12-pointed star. And then very carefully do every fence foundation across from myself, not in front of myself. I like how easy the tech ceilings make it to see if that you got that center snap point. It's a lot easier to tell. And the metal fence foundations are also really easy to see where they're lined up to. It's kind of mesmerizing sometimes making circles. Even if I couldn't build it as part of a building, just being able to make such a beautiful shape that I know was not intended to be in the game kind of makes me happy. I like being able to break the game and make something beautiful out of it. So, using some vanilla pillars here still. Oh my gosh, so much better. Trust Captain Fat Dog to know exactly what the solution was, and now it just makes me happy. Look at how that perfect circle. Use the S+ ceilings so that I can change the material later on, and just do it that way. There goes my pretty filigree looking circle. Love the pattern made by the tech ceilings there. I wasn't sure how large I wanted to make this building, but I wanted it to fit on this promontory really well. That was kind of more important in my mind, was making it look like it was just designed to fit there, like it grew there. I didn't really like depending on the whole no foundation support required thing, and so I decided to put some pillars underneath, just as if there was foundation support required. A lot of times pillars will snap down more easily if you put one on top first, and then it's easy enough to pick that up later. I usually use the S+ small pillars. I rarely use the medium and large ones just because they snap a little bit differently, and sometimes they're a little bit harder to get them to do what I want them to do. But I decided to try some of the medium pillars, which are 3 walls high, especially on these areas where I was going to need to extend them downwards quite a ways. And then go around and pick up the ones on the top, which I didn't need anymore. And go out another ceiling or two in width. I noticed that a lot of those ceilings had snapped a little lower because of the pillar creating another snap point. So I wanted to try something with the hatch frames anyway, so I went back and picked them all up so that I wouldn't have that problem to deal with later. But I had the idea of using some of the tech trapdoors, not as a functional thing, but just as a decorative detail on the floor because they are just so pretty. I love how they sparkle. So I was just playing around with different patterns, different ways of making it look more decorative. Tried one of the CKF pillars, but didn't really cooperate because CKF often will not snap with S+. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Can create some interesting interactions. But yeah, the CKF pillars will snap with S+ pillars, though, which can be nice if you can't get a CKF pillar to go where you want. You can just snap a vanilla or S+ one there first, and then put the CKF one, and then pick up the S+ one. Just playing around with making some patterns and stuff. Love how ornate this is starting to look. I decided to try some triangles in the middle there just to see how that would look. Skipping to every other pillar. Put some space between them. Really liked how that looked. But there's a few different snap points going on, so it took a little bit of work to make sure they were all snapped to the same ones so that they would be level with each other. I like the idea of greenhouse, especially since my original plan for this spot was to make it the greenhouse, but it just wasn't doing anything for me, so at least not as the floor. So decided to try more of the tech hatch frame and trapdoor idea. I do like the little spot of color that adds. That kind of ceiling doesn't really work, but yeah, this is a trick I learned from Captain Fat Dog as well, that if you place a hatch frame with a trapdoor and then you use a ceiling to replace the hatch frame, it will leave the trapdoor floating in midair. And this works with, I think, every kind of hatch frame and trapdoor. Every now and then the multi-tool will go a little bit glitchy and stop working. I've noticed it usually seems to do it if you go into the radial on a structure manually while you've got the multi-tool in your hand. But sometimes it just does it for no reason. But if you throw that one away and make a new one, or you just put it away for a while, it seems to start working again. I really like how that is starting to fit the site. I played around with different options for filling in those gaps there and making a pattern. Tried triangles, tried some larger hatch frames, just messing around, trying different things. I knew that I wanted to have arches at the bottom of it as part of the support structure that would be extending down below it. Because I wanted it to have really long columns or decorative pillars underneath that would reach all the way to the ground below. So just messing around to see what this particular arrangement with the triangles, how that would make the outer walls look with different types of walls. I did something similar in one of the Hogwarts buildings. And there is a way of making it so that even though the center sections there are overlapping in that way, the only way to really make it so that you can have a doorway or a window there without them blocking each other is to use some of the CKFR arches, which will kind of function as a half wall since they don't block both sides of the door frame. And if you've been enjoying this video so far, it would mean a lot to me if you just go ahead and tap that like button. No need to be violent, but yeah, give it a little bit of attention. That would be awesome. Thank you so much. And if you want to see more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe. See, it does kind of a woven sort of design around the edge like that. Tried a few different trapdoor options, but only the tech ones will work with the tech hatch frames. So this, of course, does still have some gaps in between, so I'll have to figure out how to fill those in a minute, but I wanted to change all of that to stone appearance so the tech part of it, the hexagon blue tech mesh stuff, would stand out kind of like little jewels. So my first idea here was to use glass ceilings snapped underneath so that nobody could fall through the hatch frames, but they would still open and close, which just gives a cool visual effect. On a previous server, I once made a dance floor that was kind of like that, with a bunch of large hatch frames with glass over them. But as you moved around on it, they would all open and close and shimmer, and it was cool looking. But there's a lot of snap points there, so they were snapping all kinds of interesting ways. But just trying a few different things. Trying a few different ones to just see if I could make it so they would open and close, which could be fun, but you wouldn't fall out and fall to your death far below. Just trying to fill in those gaps now with some glass ceilings. Play around with that a bit. So I wanted to accentuate the interesting wall design by outlining it with pillars, but I couldn't put fence foundations on the ceiling very easily because of the layers of walls. So I tried a ceiling up on top of the wall and snapping a fence foundation to that so that I could then snap pillars to the corners there. I liked it with the fancy matriculation there, so I decided to go with that design. Looking back now, though, I wish I would have used maybe wood fence foundations or stone, because the tech ones did stick out a little bit in a way that annoyed me later on. Yeah, live and learn. And I wanted to have one of the tall windows at the center of each wall section there, surrounded by some of the arches and the upside down arches to just kind of frame it and really accentuate the interesting part of that woven design on the wall. Tried some roofs in there, but then I decided that I wanted to make the walls higher before adding the roof, because I kept reminding myself gigantic creatures Mr. Meola was taming. And here we have a sneak peek into our next episode, which is going to be all about columns and the different types of columns. I figured out how to make and step by step how we made those, and also finishing up the foundation layer, so stay tuned for that. And if you would like a simple step-by-step tutorial to get you started building circular structures yourself, I'm working on that video, and as soon as it's done, it will be linked right here. Voila! In the meantime, I'm trusting the algorithm to suggest your next video for you. Here's hoping the algorithm picks a good one. Let me know which one it was. Now I'm kind of curious. If you have any questions about this build or about Ark building in general, feel free to leave those in the comments down below. I read every comment still and do my best to reply to all of them. Let me know what you would like me to make videos about. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye for now.